Hey folks, this is Deb Zahn, and I wanted to have a conversation with my fellow white people about some of the responses that white people are having both to the endangerment of Black lives as well as the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests we're seeing. And I think this is an important conversation to have because it'll really help us understand how we can be part of the solution and embrace anti-racism much more and with greater clarity so that we can do our part to end racism and racial injustice. So before I start, I just want to say nothing I'm saying is new. It didn't originate from me. Black people have been talking about this for a really long time and have written about it, created videos, created podcasts. There's lots of sources for this information. But I do think that part of what white folks need to do, including myself, is to be able to have conversations among ourselves so that we can go deeper into how we are perpetuating racism and then make a switch to be able to do our part to normalize anti-racism behavior and action. So I want to talk about, in particular, how we're responding to, or many white folks responded to, both the Amy Cooper video and then also what's happening during the protests and around the protests, because I think those are related and they're worth taking a look at because they inform us about what we need to do and what we need to work on. So the first thing I want to say is about the video. So the video, as I'm sure everybody has seen at this point, was a white woman who was putting a Black man's life in danger intentionally, and he could have easily been killed in that situation. And she knew enough about whiteness and the power of whiteness to be able to get on the phone and frame things in a certain way that would put him in enhanced jeopardy. So we've all seen it. Most folks were completely horrified by it. And happy she lost her job, happy she lost her dog, although she got the dog back. But I specifically want to talk about the dog because one thing that, as soon as that came out and there started to be a lot of social media attention to it, a lot of Black folks were quick to point out that too many white people were responding with more concern about the dog than they were responding in concern about the fact that a Black man's life was put in jeopardy. And I want to critique that a little bit because I think it is actually really important for us, and it ties to also some of what the responses are to the protests and to the movement itself. So let me first say, I'm an animal person through and through. I don't eat them. I don't consume their milk. I rescue them. I rescued 22 kittens last year and had my house filled with kittens that I was working with. So there's few animals that I wouldn't actually rescue. So I am an animal person and I value their lives. However, I was really disturbed when I saw that the response was, in terms of prioritizing the lives, that the Black man's life was pushed way down on the priority list. And what happened is the focus ended up being on her mistreatment of the dog, which she was absolutely mistreating that dog and should never have an animal again. But what that tells us is that it is deeply ingrained in white folks as part of being in a white supremacist culture to prioritize what's meaningful to us. And in that situation, and again, I saw a lot of other animal people do this because we love furry creatures or feathered creatures. We're going to prioritize that. We're going to prioritize our preferences over the fact that this Black man could have lost his life in this situation because of the actions of this woman. And so I think that's important for us to pay attention to how we prioritize, because that's not the only example that we see of that. You don't have to look far to see many examples of how white people, and I include myself in this, push the Black lives as a priority far down on the list. And I think the response to the protest is another really sad example of that. So you had a lot of folks who are like, oh yeah, I agree with what they're saying, but there was looting and they were destroying property and there was theft, as if somehow the destruction of property or even the theft of property is more important than the lives of Black people. And I don't think a lot of folks intended to say that, but what I think is that is ingrained in us, again, being part of a white supremacist culture, it is ingrained in us that that's what we do. The reality is it's so ingrained that's a special circumstance where we would say something like that when we would not do that in most other circumstances. So I'll give you a hypothetical example. If we heard that someone's house was robbed, but the owner was killed in the robbery, we would not say, oh, thank God they didn't get the TV. Or we wouldn't say, thank God the dog is okay, and belittle the fact that the owner was actually killed. At that point, it should not be about what is happening to property. It should not be about, what's happening to any other being. It should be about what is happening to the person who lost their lives, or in the case of Black people who lose their lives or are in constant threat of losing their lives. So we wouldn't actually do that anywhere else. So I think it's telling to us that that is a common response that we're hearing when it comes to seeing the destruction and theft of property. Setting aside the fact that we should be wise enough to be able to distinguish between the folks that are protesting and people who are taking advantage of a situation. But we see that in a lot of other places. So I would say what I'm working on and what I think that white folks need to be able to get to is to prioritize, and I would say not just the lives of Black people, but also their physical, their emotional, and their mental well-being, and that becomes our normal response when we see circumstances like this. And so what I've been doing with myself and what I would encourage others to do is to pay attention when you see an Amy Cooper video or you see some, a protest and you see people, who are stealing things from Target or whatever it is, to pay attention to what your immediate response is, because your immediate response before your brain has time to process it is really informative, because what it tells us is it tells us what's hardwired into us, right? It tells you basically what's going on with your operating system. And that's informative because that tells us where we need to pay attention to and where we need to do work to be able to develop a new way of thinking, new wiring, and be able to have our immediate reaction be prioritizing the Black lives that are under threat or being killed. And that's, I think, an important work that we have to do. And if we did that, then a lot of the responses that we're seeing that some white folks have that deprioritize Black lives, we would understand that our job is to push against that as hard as we possibly can so that we move into a space where we know and we instinctively know and will act with understanding and cherishing Black lives in a way that we do many other things in our lives. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope that was helpful. And I do want to say that these are things that, as a white person, again, raised in a white supremacist culture, this is part of what I work on and I pay attention to every day, because ultimately at the end of it, if we want to be in a society that is anti-racist and truly values the lives of Black people and everyone else, this is the work that we have to do. And so again, hope this was helpful, and I will probably be back with some more videos, and we'll see if that helps folks think through this.